I knew something was broken when I sat through my third executive meeting in a row where a grown man in cufflinks repeated my compliance roadmap like he came up with it during a protein shake. I'd written the damn thing in a migraine haze after pulling a 12-hour prep sprint, while also prepping for my business law final that night. But there he was, basking in the warm glow of self-congratulation while I took notes like a ghost with a company badge. No thank you, Lisa. No great work, Lisa. Just smug nods from a leadership team that thought audit controls were a vibe, not a requirement. I've learned to live in the fluorescent purgatory of being essential but invisible. If you've ever been the one explaining federal regulations to a VP who responds with, "Can we just not include that slide? It kills the mood," then you get it. I was the killjoy, the human stop sign, the woman with the spine to say, "That's illegal," while everyone else was worried about hashtags and hiring their niece. So I stopped trying to impress them and started building my exit. 3 nights a week, I dragged my laptop into the corner booth of a half-dead Panera, ordered the driest turkey sandwich known to man, and chipped away at my MBA. I didn't advertise it. I wasn't trying to be inspirational. I just wanted options. I was tired of waking up every morning knowing I was the net under their tightrope, only to be treated like a safety hazard. Speaking of safety nets, this story's about to take a turn, and if you're still here, I hope you'll tap that little subscribe button and like the story. Seriously, it helps more than you know. We've got plenty more office drama, corporate sabotage, and poetic justice on deck, and your support keeps the coffee flowing and the stories coming. Anyway, back to the purgatory. The office had become a pageant of mediocrity, where success was measured in who laughed the hardest at the VP's dad jokes or who complimented his wife's new bangs, both of which were tragic in their own ways. That's when she arrived, the VP's wife. Newly appointed head of culture, which was code for board woman with influence and no idea what a compliance officer actually does. She started showing up to meetings in pastel blazers and asking questions like, "What's our emotional alignment with the brand?" Meanwhile, I was trying to stop us from accidentally violating 3 sections of the Investment Advisors Act. She didn't like me. I didn't play the game. I didn't do bubbly. I didn't clap when she suggested putting affirmations on the office coffee cups. I'd smile, nod, and then walk back to my desk to clean up whatever regulatory mess her husband had created by streamlining documentation. The woman once said, "Let's make our compliance feel more intuitive," as if the SEC gives points for vibes. I tolerated it. I kept my head down. I knew they didn't understand what I did. Not really. But they liked that I was quiet, obedient, predictable. I answered emails at midnight, picked up the phone when they were too scared to talk to external auditors, and rewrote filings that they screwed up trying to make them sound less stiff. The truth? I was the legal duct tape on a yacht made of glitter and delusion. They thought I'd never leave. That's the real mistake. When a woman like me stops complaining, stops explaining, what they don't realize is she's not disengaged. She's just done talking. And I was done. Still, I stayed polite. I kept showing up. I kept meeting deadlines no one understood, but everyone benefited from. I watched them take my data, my insights, and my projections, and pitch them like appetizers at a networking gala. The CEO even quoted my risk mitigation strategy at an investor luncheon and called it a collective insight. I almost choked on my salad. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was tired, yes, but I was patient. Because here's the thing about compliance. You don't need a spotlight. You just need a timestamp, a signature, a paper trail. And I had all of it. It happened over champagne flutes and shrimp skewers at a company mixer so insufferable it should have come with OSHA warnings. We were in the courtyard of a boutique hotel downtown, rented out to celebrate some quarterly milestone that no one could define. The theme was Unity Through Innovation, which basically meant finger foods and forced laughter under string lights while a DJ played sanitized 80s hits. I was standing off to the side, sipping a club soda because I still had an accounting final later that night, when she found me. The VP's wife. The newly crowned queen of culture, in her lemon-yellow pantsuit and a necklace the size of a small wind chime. She floated over like a perfume ad, lips curled in that tight, pitying smile she saved for people who used the employee parking lot. I knew the moment was coming. She'd been circling me for weeks, sniffing for weakness. And now, surrounded by execs with half-drunk cocktails, she pounced. "Oh, Lisa," she said, laying a hand on my arm like I was about to faint. "I heard you're still doing that little MBA thing. How quaint." I blinked. She tilted her head. "Don't take this the wrong way, but it's honestly kind of unprofessional, isn't it? We need people fully committed to the company, not chasing side projects during cocktail hour." That last part landed like a dart to the neck. The table behind us went quiet. Someone choked on a cherry tomato. Then the laughter started. Low, scattered, polite. That fake little chuckle that people do when they know something's mean but want to stay in the good graces of power. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, nodded, and took another sip of my soda. Let them laugh. Let her win the room. I'd already passed my corporate expiration date in their eyes. I was just waiting for them to notice. The real kicker? That comment wasn't offhand. It was planned. Because 4 hours later, still in my dress from the mixer, I got called into HR. The woman from HR had the energy of a substitute yoga teacher and the vocabulary of a malfunctioning AI. "We've just observed a growing misalignment, Lisa. A sort of cultural divergence," she said, like she was trying to diagnose a rash without making eye contact. "You've been so heads down lately. It's like you're not really here with us." I could have laughed. Not here with them? I was the only reason half the org's filings hadn't been shredded by a regulator. "You're incredibly smart, obviously," she added quickly. "But sometimes brilliance doesn't translate. You know? This place runs on trust. Harmony." I leaned back in my chair, watching her sweat through a script she clearly didn't write. "Are you firing me?" "Oh, heavens, no, no, no," she said, flapping her hands like that made it less insulting. "We're offering you the chance to exit gracefully. A soft landing, a chance to focus on school, maybe." She even smiled, like she was doing me a favor. That's the moment something shifted. Not rage, no, that came later. But something cleaner, sharper. Like I finally saw the machinery behind the curtain and realized how dumb the wizard really was. I asked one question. "Who's replacing me as Chief Compliance Officer?" She blinked. "Oh, well, I assume legal will absorb your responsibilities. We'll delegate. The VP's wife is really passionate about internal values." Of course she was. That woman thought whistleblower was a sports position. I nodded slowly. "Got it." She handed me a packet. It was thick. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I recognized the template. I'd written half the language in it myself back when I helped draft HR's exit policies. It probably even still had my metadata on the file. "Lisa," the HR rep said, voice soft like she was tucking me in, "you've done good work here, but it's time to let someone more culturally aligned take it from here." I stood up, smoothed my jacket. "I'll consider the offer. Thank you." She looked relieved, mistook my calm for compliance. Again. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to sign a damn thing. Not because I needed the job, but because I knew something they didn't. They hadn't filed the change in compliance officer with the SEC, and I wasn't going to remind them. The next morning, I came in like it was any other Tuesday. No dramatic entrance, no cardboard box. Just me in my navy blazer, hair pulled back, face unreadable. The office was already buzzing with the usual corporate delusions. Someone loudly celebrating a synergy breakthrough in the break room. The VP shouting across the floor about a podcast that really gets leadership. No one noticed I was walking into my own funeral. I'd already backed up everything personal from my company laptop, what little there was. A folder of old tax documents, a photo of my cat, a saved draft of my MBA capstone titled Liability Cascades in Unregulated Systems. Funny how prophetic that would turn out to be. I went straight to my office, shut the door, and powered on the machine one last time. The system took a moment to boot. It always did on Tuesdays, internal updates pushed overnight, usually breaking 3 things to fix 1. I didn't care. I wasn't logging in to solve anything anymore. I opened my inbox. Hundreds of threads, unread. Half of them probably urgent, most of them probably pointless. A few were from legal, still trying to get clarification on my flagged note about international gift thresholds, something I'd warned them about 2 months ago that no one wanted to hear because it might ruin the client dinner in Tokyo. I deleted them all. Then I drafted one final email. Plain, precise, unemotional. Subject, departure notice, immediate. 2, Legal HRE, CEOU, compliance team. Dear all, this message serves as formal notice of my immediate resignation from the role of Chief Compliance Officer. My access credentials have been relinquished and all materials have been returned. Please ensure Form ADV is updated accordingly to reflect this change with the SEC. Wishing you all continued success. Best, Lisa Hendricks. I read it twice. No flair, no bitterness, just clean surgical language. The way compliance is supposed to sound. Cold, clear, final. I hit send, stood up, grabbed my badge off the desk. The metal was warm from the morning sun streaming through the blinds. I walked it to the front desk, placed it on the counter, and handed the receptionist my laptop. You're, leaving for the day? She asked, looking confused. Her name was Tara. Sweet girl. Intern, I think. No, I said. I'm leaving. Tara blinked. Like, leaving? I smiled. Exactly. And then I walked out. No drama, no tears, no exit speech with the staff awkwardly clapping because someone from HR forced them to show up. Just the sound of my heels against polished concrete and the knowledge that every step away was one closer to clean air. What no one knew, what not a single soul in that building seemed to grasp, was that you can't just have a chief compliance officer. It's not a hat you pass around like Office Secret Santa. You have to file it, register it, notify the federal government. And until you do, the last one on record is the one they hold responsible. That was still me. And they'd just let me walk out the front door with that responsibility hanging over the company, like a guillotine they didn't even see. The Form ADV note, that was my tell. A 3-word grenade with a 12-hour delay. Because if they knew what they were doing, they'd scramble. They'd panic. They'd get on the phone with counsel, call the SEC, do everything they could to amend the filings before the next quarterly review. But I knew them. I knew their hierarchy of urgency. If it didn't bleed on Slack or scream on a dashboard, it didn't exist. They wouldn't read the email. Or worse, they'd read it and not understand it. That's the real danger of arrogance. It doesn't just make you blind. It makes you comfortable being blind. And by the time they realized what my silence meant, they'd already signed my name to things I no longer had a legal obligation to protect. I walked 3 blocks to a diner, ordered black coffee and eggs over medium, and opened my MBA notebook. That morning's topic? Strategic failure as a function of leadership negligence. I underlined it twice. The morning after I walked out, my phone buzzed at 6:43 a.m. Not a call, just a screenshot from a friend still stuck inside the belly of the beast, a Slack message chain so tone-deaf I could practically hear the VP's cologne through the screen. VP. Lisa's out. Let's just have Vanessa own compliance for now. She's already running culture. How hard can it be? Legal intern. Don't we need to file something official with the SEC, like a Form U4 or ADV amendment? VP. We'll circle back. Focus on morale. Let's not spook the staff. I stared at that thread for a long time, spoon hovering over my oatmeal. The word morale in that man's mouth was like glitter on a coffin. Vanessa. The wife. The self-declared empath who once said, legalese is a trauma response. She'd shadowed me once during a compliance training and spent the entire session drawing hearts in her notebook and nodding like I was explaining horoscopes instead of federal record-keeping mandates. Now she was covering compliance, like it was a last-minute baby shower shift. I closed my phone. Let it burn. For a split second, something twisted in my chest. Guilt, maybe. Some old reflex tugging at me to intervene, to warn someone, to care. I'd spent 5 years patching holes in their boat while they danced on the deck and handed each other titles. I used to think my loyalty was to the company. But companies don't love you back. They send HR to do the breakup, then replace you with someone who still believes synergy is a strategy. They'd always treated compliance like an annoying seatbelt alarm, something you ignore until the car crashes. And now, they'd given the keys to someone who didn't even have a license. I took another bite of oatmeal and opened my laptop, not the company one, my own. I started drafting my MBA capstone in earnest. The title now crystal clear: The Illusion of Oversight: How Executive Complacency Breeds Institutional Risk. Meanwhile, inside that glass and metal mausoleum of bad decisions, things were unraveling. Legal tried to schedule a meeting with Vanessa about upcoming reporting obligations. She declined, said she was swamped redesigning the onboarding experience. That same intern, God bless his underpaid soul, kept pushing. He flagged that, without a named and registered chief compliance officer on file, the firm could technically be in breach of SEC Rule 206-47. The CEO's response? I don't have time for hypotheticals. And there it was. The magic trick executive teams pull on themselves. Treat every warning like a vibe check until it becomes a subpoena. The intern, smart kid, tried again, this time with a bulleted list. Here's what we're currently filing under Lisa's name. Here's what hasn't been updated. Here's the actual regulation, with highlights. He was pulled off the thread and reassigned to rebranding metrics support. You can't make this stuff up. Vanessa sent out a company-wide email that afternoon with the subject line, "Integrity is a vibe," and a quote from some influencer about being your most compliant self. She attached a photo of a cat in glasses with the caption, "This could be you if you follow the rules." That email ended up on LinkedIn. People clapped in the comments. The intern messaged me on my personal email, hesitant, probably afraid I'd report him. I know you're not there anymore, but I just wanted to say, you were right about everything. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I finally realized it wasn't my mess to clean up. There was a time when I would have marched back in there, files in hand, ready to steer the ship. But ships captained by clowns deserve the iceberg, and I'd spent too long pretending I was part of the crew when, really, I was the only one holding the compass. I didn't need revenge. I just needed distance. But karma, it turns out, had already packed its briefcase and started making calls. And the first ring was coming from the SEC. It hit my inbox around 2:11 p.m., tucked between a LinkedIn spam message about digital synergy partnerships and an invitation to a virtual alumni wine tasting I had no intention of joining. At first, I almost ignored it. The sender's name was familiar in the vaguest way. Chris J., Associate Auditor, SEC Midwest Division. We'd crossed paths briefly at a financial compliance roundtable a year back. He was new then, nervous, and had asked if we had any compliance TikToks to share with the younger staff. I'd said no, deadpan, and he'd laughed awkwardly like I was joking. Now he was in my inbox with a message that read, "Hey Lisa, just a heads up, we're dropping by company name tomorrow morning for a standard compliance review. Random audit, nothing major. Hope you're well." I stared at it for a moment. Read it again. Let the words sink in. Random audit. Tomorrow morning. I smiled. Not a smirk, not a laugh. Just the kind of smile you give a chessboard when your opponent forgets your bishop's been parked behind their knight the whole game. The kind of smile that comes from knowing the fall is already midair and you didn't have to lift a finger. I typed back, "Hi Chris, appreciate the heads up. I'm no longer affiliated with the firm. Resigned earlier this week. Please feel free to reach out to their legal department directly for any coordination. All the best, Lisa." No emojis, no exclamation points, just the clean scalpel of professional detachment. Then I opened a new email and forwarded the thread to my personal attorney. Subject line, FYI, SEC contact. In the body, I added, "Heads up. Looks like they're walking into a storm. No CCO on file. No formal transition. Timing couldn't be better. Let me know if we need to get ahead of anything. I've got records of everything. Lisa." I hit send and closed my laptop. Sat there for a second. The hum of the fridge. The occasional bark from a dog down the street. A breeze slipped in through the window and shuffled the edge of my MBA notes like they were waiting their turn to matter. I thought I might feel something. Pity, maybe. Concern. A little echo of the version of me that used to stress-eat almonds while double-checking a single line item on a disclosure form because the VP wanted it reworded to feel friendlier. But no, that version of me didn't live here anymore. Letting the crash happen wasn't malicious. It was overdue. They'd built the entire compliance structure like a set prop, something that looked good under soft lighting but collapsed if anyone leaned on it too hard. I was the scaffolding. And when they pushed me out for not clapping hard enough at culture slides, they thought the structure would hold. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't warn the intern, or legal, or even the sweet receptionist who once offered me half her muffin during a fire drill. Not because I wanted them hurt, but because if you stand on a collapsing stage long enough, eventually the floor stops caring who your favorites are. I spent the rest of the afternoon going for a walk. Just me, a podcast, and the soft crunch of dead leaves under my sneakers. When I got back, I brewed tea and sat down to finish the third chapter of my capstone. The title of the section? False Delegation: The Danger of Assuming Institutional Memory. I wrote until the sun went down. At 5:36 p.m., my phone buzzed. Another screenshot. This time from the intern. CEO. Does anyone know who's leading tomorrow's audit prep? Vanessa? Vanessa. I'm in Napa for my cousin's engagement. Can someone loop in our actual compliance person? Legal. Lisa resigned. There's been no replacement filed. CEO. What the hell is Form ADV? I turned off my phone, drank my tea, and waited. At exactly 9:00 a.m., a man in a navy suit with government-issued posture walked into the front lobby of the company's glass fortress, clipboard in hand, badge displayed, face calm in that uniquely terrifying federal way. He introduced himself to the receptionist, asked to speak with the chief compliance officer, and handed over his card like it was just another Tuesday. His name was Christopher Jensen, Associate Auditor, SEC. Tara, the receptionist, God bless her innocence, smiled and said, "Lisa's not in today." He raised an eyebrow. "Lisa Hendricks? She's still your registered CCO, yes?" Tara hesitated. I think she's on a break or something." Chris didn't frown, didn't blink, just made a note on his clipboard. "Then I'll wait." 10 minutes later, legal got wind. A paralegal came sprinting into the general counsel's office, breathless, whispering something about an unannounced SEC visit, and he asked for Lisa directly. Within 60 seconds, 3 different lawyers were flipping through paper binders like it was 2003. The general counsel was shouting into his desk phone, and someone finally ran to the break room and yanked the CEO out of his second cappuccino. The CEO, Mark Dillon, walked into the boardroom where the auditor was now seated, calmly sipping bottled water and flipping through a brochure someone had mistakenly handed him on Culture and Courage, Our Workplace Promise. He looked up, polite as ever. "Morning," Chris said. "We're conducting a standard compliance review. Shouldn't take long. I'd just like to review filings with your chief compliance officer." Mark blinked, twice. "Lisa no longer works here." Chris made another note. "Ah, then who's been designated as CCO on your Form ADV since her departure?" The silence hit like a pulled fire alarm. Someone from HR muttered something about transition planning. A junior counsel fumbled with his laptop, trying to locate any official notice of reassignment. Vanessa, still in Napa, blissfully unaware, had posted an Instagram story an hour earlier from a vineyard with the caption, "When you choose joy, the universe complies." Chris folded his hands. Just to confirm, since Lisa Hendricks is still the last registered CCO on file, any filings submitted after her resignation would be considered, at minimum, in need of formal amendment. At worst, depending on the disclosures, potentially in violation of Rule 206.4.7. The CEO tried to smile, that slippery PR smile he wore during interviews and layoffs. I'm sure this is just an administrative oversight. We've got a very robust culture here. Chris cut him off without raising his voice. Culture is not compliance, Mr. Dillon. That's when legal started to sweat. Real sweat. Not the glossy discomfort of investor calls or bad headlines, but that gut-cold realization that something had gone fundamentally wrong and there was no cheerful Slack channel to spin it away. Someone finally pulled up the SEC's database. Sure enough, Chief Compliance Officer, Lisa Hendricks' status, active last ADV update 3 days ago, post-dated to include revised AUM figures, filed by someone using Lisa's login credentials. The room froze. Because that filing, that was submitted after my resignation email, after my badge had been turned in, which meant, legally speaking, it was a false submission. Chris didn't yell. He just leaned back in his chair. I'll need to open a formal line of inquiry. The CEO's hand trembled as he reached for his water. Out in the world, I was making breakfast, toasting a bagel. The cat was screaming at the dishwasher like it owed her money. I had soft jazz on in the background and a notebook open on my dining table. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote at the top, Chapter 4, The Collapse. Under it, I jotted the first line. Never let someone else file in your name, especially if you've already walked out the door. I took a bite of bagel and smiled. In that boardroom, they were just starting to understand that. But they had a long way to fall. The headline came through around 1:17 p.m., just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. Decaf. Not that it mattered. I'd been staring at my laptop screen, deep in capstone edits, when a little notification from a financial blog popped up in the corner. Breaking SEC opens inquiry into midcap wealth partners over CCO filing irregularities. I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I just leaned back, took a slow sip, and clicked the article. The write-up was short and surgical. Classic financial press. Dry tone, deadly implications. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened a preliminary inquiry into midcap wealth partners after discovering misfiled regulatory documents listing a former executive, Lisa Hendricks, as Chief Compliance Officer days after her resignation. The filings include quarterly AUM adjustments and risk disclosures now under review for potential misrepresentation. Legal analysts note the violation could trigger broader investigations into the firm's oversight protocols. That word, misrepresentation, was doing a lot of quiet damage, and it hadn't even hit Bloomberg yet. My phone buzzed nonstop for the next hour. Missed calls, texts, screenshots. 2 different reporters sliding into my LinkedIn DMs with messages like, "Hi Lisa, would you be willing to comment on the recent SEC activity at your former firm?" One even added a little fire emoji. Classy. I didn't reply. Instead, I copied the headline and pasted it into the top of my capstone draft. I'd been workshopping the opening hook for days, trying to make the intro feel grounded and relevant. Now it started with, in 2025, a mid-sized financial firm became a case study in executive liability, not because of a whistleblower leak or malicious fraud, but because they failed to understand what a chief compliance officer actually does. It was poetic, really, because just last semester, I'd submitted a preliminary paper on regulatory chain of custody in wealth management firms. My professor had written in the margin, interesting hypotheticals, but highly unlikely in the real world. I was tempted to forward him the article with a smiley face. Back at MidCap, I imagined the situation wasn't nearly as calm. Someone in legal had surely started digging through archived emails, panicking over every message that used the phrase "on Lisa's behalf." Investor relations must have been swatting away calls like mosquitoes in a swamp, every client with more than 7 figures wanting to know if their advisor's last report had been signed by a ghost. Worse still, the misfiled ADV update wasn't minor. It included asset totals, risk profile adjustments, and a summary of operational controls. And it had been submitted using my credentials, post-resignation. Fraud? Maybe not provable. Negligence? Absolutely. And negligence, when wrapped in SEC scrutiny and investor paranoia, spreads faster than any rumor on Reddit. One of the screenshots someone forwarded me showed an internal message chain between two VP-level staffers. VP 1. We need a fall guy. Can we say IT failed to deactivate her access? VP 2. That won't hold. We logged her badge return and email cutoff. She was out. VP 1. Then who the hell submitted the ADV? No response. Another text from a former coworker simply said, "They're saying you never told them you left." I sent back, "Check your inbox. Timestamped. Legal. HR. CEO. Form ADV note included." Silence. Because now it wasn't just about losing face. It was about federal regulators staring down a C-suite that had signed, filed, and possibly fabricated documents under someone else's name, and that someone had warned them in writing. They'd built a bonfire, and now they were standing in it, holding marshmallows and wondering why it felt warm. And I was on my couch, surrounded by peace and scented candles, outlining a chapter called "The Consequences of Delegated Ignorance." I highlighted a line I'd just written. Compliance is not a role. It's a boundary. When you erase it, what you're left with isn't flexibility. It's liability. I poured another cup of coffee. Still warm, unlike their stock price. They reached out through a lawyer first. Not mine. Theirs. A carefully worded email to my attorney. Subject line, "Proposal for Strategic Re-engagement." That was their way of saying, we screwed up and need the person we underestimated to clean up the bloodstain before the guests arrive. It was riddled with buzzwords like continuity and reputation salvage and temporary advisory scope, but the intent was as clear as a smudged window during a hurricane. They were desperate, and they thought I might still care. The board, I'm told, had convened a special session to discuss what they referred to as post-departure exposure, which is rich, considering I'd told them to update the Form ADV, and they filed it anyway under my name like I was still sitting at my desk, wearing a lanyard and swallowing bile. Their offer was a 3-month advisory contract. High pay, full discretion, remote optional, reinstatement of benefits. A chance, as they called it, to help stabilize the institution you helped build. I stared at the email and didn't laugh. I just sent it to my lawyer with a single note. Draft the decline. Keep it surgical. The next morning, they received a 1-paragraph reply. Ms. Hendricks has no interest in remediation. She trusts the firm will notify all impacted clients per SEC standards. As a courtesy, she has preserved all communications relevant to the timeline in question and remains available only if formally subpoenaed. No signature flourish. No softening. Just the sound of a door slamming shut. And while they scrambled to pretend the house wasn't already on fire, I finally started mine. That same day, I filed documentation under whistleblower protection. Not performatively, not vindictively, just methodically. Emails, meeting notes, internal messages where I'd raised concerns multiple times about improperly segmented accounts, red-flagged gifts from international clients, and, most notably, a high-profile advisor who kept trying to overwrite disclosures with friendlier language. I'd been told, more than once, it's not non-compliant if we don't submit it yet. Now I submitted everything, through the proper portal, with timestamps, backed by evidence, packaged like a compliance Christmas gift wrapped in regulatory ribbon. I didn't leak it to the press. Didn't blast it on LinkedIn. That wasn't the goal. The goal was truth. Quiet, traceable, irrefutable truth. Because here's what they never understood. Power isn't in the noise. It's in the record. Meanwhile, chaos bloomed inside those glass walls. Investors began asking for clawbacks. One client firm reportedly requested full disengagement, citing material breach of fiduciary expectations. The general counsel started working from home. Vanessa? Silent. Her last Instagram story was archived. Someone leaked that she'd been repositioned within the organization, a term so vague it might have meant exiled to a locked Slack channel. An anonymous Glassdoor review appeared. We had one person who knew how to keep this place from getting sued. They pushed her out for bad optics. Now we're all watching our inboxes like death row inmates. That one made me chuckle. At night, I added another section to my capstone. Chapter 5. The Silence of the Sidelined. It began with this line: when institutions silence those who warn them, they don't eliminate the risk. They just lose their only defense. I didn't want revenge, but I got justice. Not the kind with confetti or headlines. The kind that files cleanly, that holds up in court. The kind that speaks loudest when everyone else has stopped talking. The earnings call was supposed to be routine, buttoned up, over-rehearsed, coated in that sterile optimism executives love to wear like cologne. The CEO, Mark Dillon, sat in his home office, flanked by 2 potted plants, trying to look calm as the quarterly numbers scrolled on screen. He started with the usual chest thumping. Despite market volatility, mid-cap wealth has maintained strong performance indicators. It was the corporate version of humming with your eyes closed while the room burns. But then it happened. Line 5 of the agenda. Analyst Q&A. A voice came through the line, firm and clear. Female, Wall Street seasoned. Can you clarify if it's true that the firm is currently under SEC review, stemming from the unauthorized filing of regulatory documents under a former chief compliance officer's name, specifically after her departure? Silence. Mark blinked. Legal, off-screen, probably threw up into a trash can. He adjusted his tie, tried to smile. That's an internal matter. We're working closely with all relevant, stakeholders to ensure clarity moving forward. The analyst didn't miss a beat. So you confirm there is an inquiry. Mark glanced down. We're unable to comment on any ongoing correspondence with federal bodies. Another analyst cut in. Was the individual in question, Lisa Hendricks, your sole registered CCO at the time of the filings? Mark's voice dropped. We believe roles were in transition. Another voice. That's not what the SEC database says. And just like that, the floor dropped. Twitter caught the clip within 15 minutes. Reddit had a thread titled, Mid-Cap CEO Eats His Tie on Live Call, before the closing bell. Someone posted a screenshot of a Bloomberg blurb quoting an unnamed former senior compliance officer. They prioritized appearances over legality. I simply stepped out of the way. I recognized my own phrasing. I'd said it during a quiet coffee shop interview with a journalist who'd been following the case. No names, just facts. She asked if I regretted not stopping it sooner. I said, my job was to document the risk, not carry the company on my back while they ignored it. The stock dropped 11% in 3 hours. By end of week, it was 18%. That Friday, a memo leaked internally announcing that Vanessa, the VP's wife, had transitioned to external consulting opportunities. No goodbyes, no party, no parting post full of empty gratitude and wine emojis. Just gone. Investors began demanding updates. One even threatened litigation if his portfolio was impacted by internal incompetence masked as strategic oversight. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a quiet seminar room across from my MBA advisor discussing the final formatting of my capstone. He read the new title aloud, Collapse by Design, a study in executive negligence, regulatory overreach, and the power of walking away. He looked up and asked, was this inspired by your old job? I just smiled, loosely. That night, I gave a guest lecture to a room of evening MBA candidates. Half of them had day jobs in firms just like MidCap, places held together with jargon and hubris. During the Q&A, one student asked, so what's the takeaway? I said, never be the only thing holding the roof up. And if you are, leave before they blame you for the collapse. Afterward, I walked home in the autumn chill. My inbox was quiet. My lawyer hadn't called. The world, for once, wasn't on fire behind me. I lit a candle, opened a bottle of red, read an article about my former company's ongoing federal cooperation. I felt nothing but clean distance. Justice didn't come from shouting. It came from the silence that followed the truth. And next semester? That case study's going on the syllabus.